Kevin is professor of geology, and he's also director of the Rio Grande Research Center here at Sul Ross. He joined the Sul Ross faculty back in 1991, so as I remember I joined in the fall of 92, and Kevin had been here obviously for a year before that. His background, he's a homegrown Lobo, I guess. He earned his bachelor's and master's degree in geology here from Sul Ross, and then he relocated and went to Washington State to earn his PhD in geology from Washington State University. In terms of his academic preparation, most of his focus was on geochemical aspects and field relations of volcanic rocks in West Texas and also in northeastern Oregon. His dissertation was entitled Geology of the Eastern Part of the Clarendon Formation, Northeast Oregon, USA. And since he's come back to Sul Ross, Dr. Urbanczyk has expanded his research interest to include more general environmental aspects of the Trans-Pecos region. And this includes watershed studies in the Pine Canyon area of Big Bend National Park, and the Big Bend Range State Park, and groundwater studies in the Big Bend region of air particulate sampling here in Alpine. And I also want to mention Kevin has a pretty long ongoing research relationship with watershed studies over in Hungary as well, which is wonderful too. I want you to welcome Dr. Kevin Urbanczyk.
Thank you, Kevin. Sure. That's me, Rowan. That's another thing I do, and listed in that things that I do research on, you're going to see a lot of the river stuff, which I absolutely included. This was last summer. Leslie Hopper standing on the back of the filming all of this. 4,000 CFS of ice line. Some of you might be familiar with that. That's a pretty good one right there. The big holes right there. So, all right, so let's switch over to the slides. So, fear and learning in the Big Bend. Is it safe to take a field trip down there? So I brought you in with blood and guts and stuff, and then I'm going to show you some science too. So let's start with the blood and guts, I guess. Maybe the best way to put it. This is where we live. First off, let me point out this is a satellite mosaic. This is taken from 700 kilometers up, Landsat program. And my student Jonathan Dias, about 5 years ago, created this mosaic. Jonathan is working on his PhD in Minnesota. So anybody tell where Alpine is? Hope thinks he knows. Is it here? It's almost at the reservoir. Is it here? Presidio, Ojinaga? No. Okay, no. So, well, let me just show you. It is right there. So there's Alpine. So this is sort of the research playground that I have to work with. And we're going to see this slide many times throughout this, so I can point you in different directions where I do work. So that's the satellite image. Basically what I want to do is these bullets. I want to tell you about the fear issue and what's important and what's, I think, is less important. I want to tell you why I go there, what I studied the Rio Grande, the environment, and the volcanoes, and the parks. And then I want to tell you what we have to help out before and after and during on these trips. And then basically the conclusion. So, perceptions of border violence. These slides were put together for a talk 2 years ago before the Boquillas crossing was open. If you're not familiar, there is a new open crossing in Big Bend National Park to the small village called Boquillas near Rio Grande Village. So before that was open, there was a lot of controversy. It took years to get the thing to happen, but I'm going to focus on two things that were said in the literature and the media. One was by this representative who says we need to use our resources to secure the border rather than making it easier to enter. I don't agree with that. I think opening up that crossing is great. I come from the days when you used to be able to go across at Boquillas and at Santa Elena and at Paso Lajitas anytime, pre-9/11. It was really fun to do that. It was a good cooperative thing with Northern Mexico. But after 9/11, those were closed, and then just recently, one was reopened. This other one, this was from the Houston Chronicle. I don't remember who said it, but there likely will be a fight for control of the tiny plaza. That's in Boquillas. Anybody get there? I don't see it happening. This is what they anticipated was going to happen. So there's some unfounded fear from people outside of the region. They read the media that says that people were killed in Juarez and in Acuna and places like that, and they interpolate or extrapolate that out to the Big Bend. I'm making the point that I don't think that it's happening in the Big Bend. Local perceptions of border violence. This is a website from Far Flung Outdoor Center, and they sort of allude to border security just by the title. But then they most importantly say, we can't guarantee anybody's safety. Same for me when I take people on trips. But probably you're going to get bit by a snake or scratched or poked with a cactus, something like that. I don't think you're going to get shot by a bad guy. That's what I think. And I can kind of back that up with years and years and years of experience. Locally, a lot of people don't want to see that border fence that we've heard about. What a stupid idea. So there are local perceptions about we need to say no to some of this. We can't get around the fact that the federal government is funding a lot of homeland security activities. We have a lot of border patrol people in Norfolk, Alpine, and Big Bend. That's okay. And in fact, in Big Bend, they seem to be cooperative with the park staff that I'm familiar with. But we don't need a fence. Among other things, how impractical would it be to try to build a fence? This actually is the south rim, but the topography over the whole region you'll see is like that. How could you do that? How could you build a fence? So what I want to talk about instead of the border violence is what should, or is it safe? Actually, this is related to border violence. First, is it safe to be in Brewster County, which includes the Big Bend? So my colleague at University of Texas Outdoor Rec Center, UT Outdoor Rec had been doing Lower Canyons for years and years and years, and they were told they could not do that anymore because their administrators have read that there's all this border violence. You can't take our students out there. So what Chris Burnett, his name is right there at the bottom, Chris Burnett, he put together statistics. So this group is statistics by Texas County, border counties. So we see Brewster here. We've got, if you interpolate out, or whatever you say, extrapolate, we have 1,000 incidences per 100,000 people. Of course, we don't have 100,000 people, so that means we have 101. If you look at this slide, the safest place to be is Presidio County. They have a total of 29 incidences in the whole year. So Presidio County is pretty safe. These other counties that are border, if you look at the ratio of 2,000, we're 1,000. Carroll is 3,000, but look, you're extrapolating out from the total 34. Basically, all those counties are fairly safe. If you compare it to counties comparable to Brewster County, Stevens County, there's Brewster, Dowling, Ward, we're still looking better than all of the rest of them, just based on those basic statistics. Things aren't really that bad here. Then if you compare it to just other counties, then you look great. Harris County, 5,000 incidences per 100K, 5,000, 1,500, 2,000. They're all higher. So what Chris's point was to UT administration is it's not that, and that's not what we should be worried about. We need to be worried about the environment, the things that the things that we want to go see, but we need to be prepared for that environment. One last thing, comparing national parks, Lassen, Yellowstone, and Big Bend, we actually are higher. If you look, the annual visits of Big Bend are 340,000, just a little less than Lassen, and they only had 7. Big Bend had 25. So, yeah, compared to other national parks, even the proportion of Yellowstone. But, geographically, these are very different places. So, I think we can hopefully conclude, and you would agree with me, that the statistics reveal that it's not that dangerous a place to be, at least in terms of crimes. These guys are out there to protect us. This is one of our trips. This is way down the opposite. This is from Martin Canyon. Border Patrol is out there. And it's a boat geek. That's a big old V8 right there. Straight pipes. That thing was so loud. These guys are not sneaking up on anything. Very top heavy. That's pretty interesting to see. They just passed us. They waved, but that's about all they did. Again, that's way down here on the side reservoir. You will not see this in Big Bend or Lower Canyons. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about that. So what else is scary than the violence? Well, there's that. There are fires, flaming cows with the photo. There's that on campus maybe. Not yet, but we've heard of them out on campus. You have to be worried about that. There are natural things. And then if you're unlucky, you get in this book. I almost made it. My brother-in-law, John Credit, and his good friend Gary Schindel were going to do this crazy hike. Laguna Meadows, anybody know where Laguna Meadows up in the high cheese is? Right. They're going to hike down through the inner sand and come out over the Capitol Falls, rappelling down and pulling their ropes through. Right? So that didn't sound like a very smart idea to me, so I didn't go. And what ended up happening is they got clipped out. They got to a point where, whoops, we shouldn't have come down this one. We pulled our rope through. We can't do that. But what they've done is the right thing. They have informed the Park Service they were doing this. They put notes in their car. People knew to look. And sure enough, they got stuck. They couldn't get out. And so Park Service dropped 2 park rangers. One of them was Mike Ryan. Some of you probably know. Good friend of ours, and they pulled him, dropped the rope down, pulled him up, hiked him out the route they should have taken in the first place. So there are happy endings to some of the stories in the book, but those that do not have happy endings, there are various reasons. Some are suicides, some are just they went out and were not prepared. And that's what I try to avoid with experience and preparation. So my question is, if you go to me on one of my crazy plane trips, could this be good? And my answer is, hopefully not. So this is what I do. One of the things I do to prepare myself for trips is I maintain my WAFA, W-A-F-A, Wilderness Advanced First Aid Certification. Initially, it's a 5-day class. You take it in Terlingua or all over the place. Great Pennington and Farfam Networks and does this every January for the people who are working on the river and other kinds of tours you do them. So I maintain my certification. I've taken the 5-day twice, and then every 2 years, you can take a 2-day refresher. So anyway, I'm not part of the refresher. You can see it. So what that does is make us prepared for the basic kind of medical things that might happen, given that you know that you're hours and hours and hours from the hospital, 4 days. So that's the way I get at it, with experience, with knowledge, with preparation, and the basic first aid training. By the way, this is a training if you were going to work as a guide on Rio Grande or anywhere else down there. This is what you have to be employed as a guide. So these 2 pictures are from one of our trips, Lower Canyons. It's Benjamin Schwartz, colleague from Texas State University. He was bitten by a cricket. This trip was in June. It's hot, so Benjamin is laying out on top of his sleeping bag up on this sandal, and his bare feet are just there. And so what we can figure out apparently is very odd behavior for a venomous snake to just come up and bite somebody at night, but he did. Benjamin his leg was swelling. You can see how he did you take a Sharpie and you mark how the swelling is time. Whoever did this ship tape will know how rapidly that was moving up. It was pretty painful. He's okay there. This was the next morning. We had satellite phone. We had a park ranger too with us. There's Marcos. Some of you know Marcos Paredes, who's a retired river ranger. And so quickly the next morning, the Border Patrol helicopter comes in, lands down in this deep canyon, which on that map right over there is right there, silver, and picks him up, and he's gone. He went to PJ first, Panther Junction, and then life flighted to Midland. That probably wasn't necessary, but he was okay. We had a satellite phone, that's one thing. We were prepared, we had the first aid training, etc. So, first off, quote, there's not bad weather, there's bad gear or preparation. Experience really goes a long ways to making sure these trips are successful. So preparation and training are key elements, and satellite phones don't substitute for that, but they're sure nice to have. Otherwise, Benjamin would have been fine. He would have been miserable for the next 4 days. This was day 3 of a 7-day trip, and there's no cell phones in there. There's no cell coverage in there. So he would have gotten to ride out the rest of that trip all the way down here, probably just sitting around in pain while we did our work. So there you go. Here's a trip from last year. One of my students got poked in the toe with a dried up river canyon, bleeding a lot. But notice there's proper technique. Anybody see the proper technique? There's gloves on. If you've taken the WAFA class, you pop your rubber bands when you size up the scene. First thing, you have to put your gloves on. Your body substance isolation devices. That's what you do. And then you size up the scene to make sure it's safe for you, and then you check the ABCs. Airway, breathing, circulation. If those things aren't working, there's no point. Your patient is dying or is already dead. So first thing are the ABCs. Then you go through with all the other stuff that they teach you and try to clean it up or something. Okay, so Park Service said better safe than sorry. I agree. Things happen. You know they're going to happen, but you be smart. Or a different way to say that is don't be stupid, but be smart. Okay, so why do I go here? Well, there's a lot of interest in the border region. A few years back, our then Secretary of Interior, Ken Salazar, and his Mexican colleague, whose last name is Elvira, there was a lot of media around an event related to the opening of the border crossing of Oquias and the release of endangered species, or the release of the Rio Grande Silver minnow, is the one that I'm going to show you here. The two secretaries of the Interior came to Big Bend along with some of the higher representatives of the Border Patrol, and some of you might have been there, but this is Salazar there and Elvira there. And they waded out in the river and they symbolically released a bunch of Rio Grande silvery minnows. They're trying to re-establish, they were extirpated back in the 60s. So there's this governmental, sort of high-level governmental kind of interest in the Big Bend region on both sides for the sake of the environment. It's one of the few bright spots in the media about the U.S.-Mexico border. So this builds on something in Franklin Roosevelt's time. He had a vision of Big Bend being a national park with it being a trans-boundary park of northern Mexico. That's not going to happen likely, but this is what is there. In Mexico, there are areas of protection that span the full Big Bend region. Let's see, this is Sierra Rica, this one's Del Carmen, this one's El Campo, I can't remember the name of the middle one. Combine that with Big Bend National Park, Black Gap, Big Bend Ranch, Elephant Mountains, Shamati, which may soon become a state park instead of a natural area, by the way. And this comes up to 3 million acres. If you put New Jersey or what is it, Rhode Island, no, it's about that size. This is a huge area. It's out there for us to monitor, to observe, to study. So there's that region. What do we do specifically when we go out there? Well, there's that map again. What I want to do is that it says a large area for research. It's yellow font. I hope you can see it. We're going to see different bits of research and other activities in Big Bend Ranch State Park, Colorado Canyon, Salina Canyon, Big Bend National Park, Oquias, Lower Canyons. So that's kind of the area I focus on in those outdoor kinds of trips. So let's look at a few of those. There's my field office. This was Lower Canyons with about a couple thousand CFS, so we can take a bath. Beautiful geologic map published back by the IBWC when they were thinking of putting a dam, like right there. Good thing they didn't do that. They put it farther downriver at Amistad. And so what we're doing is we're floating down the river and we're looking for spring input. We'll see some more of that here in a moment. So we have a geologic map, GPS, you see that here. Basically, there's a field office. We're also doing topographic studies of sandbars in Oquias Canyon. That's a total station, a laser theodolite, the guys running and the students out there adopting the sandbar. Basic geomorphology of sandbars. I'll explain why that's important here in a minute. Oops. And then we play with expensive toy boats. There's Billy Route. Some of you might know Billy. She is now a park ranger. She got a master's degree with us, studying springs in the Lower Canyon. And that's an acoustic Doppler current profile. It's a boat that floats across, shoots sound waves down, and it gets you a velocity at multiple levels below the boat. And then as you move it across, it can calculate the total amount of flow going across it. It's a very nice device. Otherwise, you have to wade out there. It saves you from wading across, doing about 25 minutes until you're across the river. So I'm going to give you a virtual tour of that. This is the Lower Canyon. Many of you probably are not familiar with this thing, but I'm going to put you in our chocolates. You know what chocolates are, you're saying. So there's Alpine right there. And just briefly, I'm going to give you the logistics first. So 6 o'clock in the morning on Monday, this was just 3 weeks ago. 6 a.m., you leave Alpine and you drive all the way down to Panther Junction. Days and weeks prior to this, you have been stressing, I've got to pack all my science gear. I can't forget anything because we're going to be out there a long time and we don't want to ruin the trip because I forgot a battery. So you've got to have all that stuff. Somebody packs food for 12 people for 7 days. That's not easy either. So all that's done, 6 a.m. Monday morning, you do that. Then you meet at Panther Junction at the river cache to get in, and you pack up all the boats and kitchen stuff and all that stuff. And you drive way over in Blacktop. Now that drive, I don't know how many of you have been to Blacktop, but this is the farthest reach of Blacktop you can imagine. The road only goes about half a mile further. Taylor's Farm. It's hours of bumpy road. Monday at 2 p.m. you get there. Then you put on the river, and then for the next 6 days, or 6.5 days, you do that on the river. And now it's Sunday noon, and you come back and you go all the way back to Panther Junction. The most painful turn is right there. Because you can almost see Alpine. You're tired. But you have to turn left to go to BJ and help them unpack the boats and all that stuff. And then finally you get to go back Alpine and you get home at 7 o'clock. And guess what? Monday morning comes and you're back to work. And you just finished that trip. So anyway, this is what it's like. This is a flyover. This is Google Earth. I'm going to kind of give you the air view from Google's Earth. There we're starting at Taylor's Farm. We're driving along here. We put on the river right there. And we're going to float around. We're going to camp a few days off by driving into Taylor's Farm so that we can have more time to do the science. We're interested more in things from Taylor's Farm down. So normally it's 72. We do it in 7 days, but we do 60 miles. Oops. There we go. Okay. So there's our crew. This is not going to be like my photo album, but I want to show you a few things about who's out there with us. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Pete, Amy, some of you probably know Amy Roberson, Diego, and Chris are on the trip. And then there's Texas Parks and Wildlife, there's King Saunders, and then Big Bend National Park is our Ranger Duck Hams and Jeff Bennett, and then the rest are Sul Ross, Sean Hopper, Eddie Sykes, Jonas Ball, me, and Sam Birch. So 5 out of the 12 are Sul Ross, becoming Sul Ross veterans, because Sean and Jonas, this is their second trip. They all have chocolates on them, that says, yeah. All right. So here's what it looks like. What an environment. The lower canyons. Springs. This is Mexican Hot Springs. This is coming, that is a pool. People kind of dam it up to kind of make a pool there. It's 90-degree water. 90 degrees. And it's not hot in the winter, but it's warm, which is nice. Right below there, coming out of Texas, is another spring-fed stream. This is, we call it Son of Hot Springs. It's coming out of the ground right there. It's just a stream of 90-degree water. Very good quality water. Farther down is one of the major obstacles on the river. It's Upper Madison Rapid. It's a bunch of boulders there and a huge boulder pile there. When the water's super high, it's scary. When the water's low, it's difficult. It looks like this. I call it negotiating the rapid. You really have to pull heavy boats full of science gear and camping gear literally over the rocks. And it takes everybody getting out in the water. In the winter, if it's really cold, you take everything out of the boats and you portage. And that's even harder because there's a trail that goes up around the side of the Mexican thing. And then this is Taylor last year, 2 years ago. You have to then let the boats down and people park them down there while we had to get 9 boats through there. It took us about an hour and a half just to get all those boats through there. They're major obstacles, those rapids. This is what lunch is like on a good day, a lucky day. I call it shady lunch. We put up the shade because we were going to do some science and we needed it, and that's what lunch looks like. This is normal lunch. Everybody hovering around a blue roller table. It's kind of chaos. Everybody's trying to grab pickles, Pringles, peanut butter, cold cuts, and whatever else, cookies, before they're all gone. That's pretty much what lunch is like. And it's pretty crazy. That's what it is. So there is one of the, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful sites out there. This is from up on the looking across the river. Rio Grande is coming in this way, and this is Tule Canyon. Tule Canyon, and this beautiful fin, just this ridge of rock. Our camp is right down below that. By the way, if you whoops, no, it's next. Wait a minute, we back up here a sec to this one. The camp for that night is right there. Once you see, that's our circle of people, whatever reason, they want to spread out. So all of our, some people put up tents, some people just put up cots or sleeping bags on the ground, but it's always a circle. It's just a big circle. So it's a natural phenomenon of Okay, this time we saw 2 black bear. We scared them up. They ran down the Texas side. There was a mother and a little baby, and they jumped in the river and swam right across right in front of us. I've seen black bear in the high cheeses a lot, never on the river. And then they disappear up into that canyon. In a moment, we're going to talk about canyon, bad stuff. But it's great for hiding bears. For bears for hiding. 7 days, and we saw no deer. 7 days. How many places in the country can you do that and be paddling or going through such a beautiful environment? 7 days and not a single person did we see. I'm not saying somebody didn't see us, but we didn't see them.
We saw the people on the trip.
Well, I saw the other 11 people. Got to know them very well. So here's what we did, or do. This is a chemistry trip for us. There's Sean, this is my crew. Sam's not in there with the rest of our students. So we've got a little pH meter and a little battery-operated stirrer and a little nitric acid titrator, and we check out we're grabbing water samples for various things. So we've got a lab. That thing over there, it's probably a chair or something. So anyway, that's what part of what we do. The aquatic guys, Fish and Wildlife and Parks and Wildlife, they're doing fish surveys, so they're seining fish, looking for the Rio Grande silvery minnow and other species just to see what's there. We're looking for vertebrates, so they have different ways to sample to see what vertebrates are in the pools and riffles and the runs, and various ways they do that. And they're checking velocity and taking lots of notes on this. And then we're measuring discharge, where we put a flow meter and work our way all the way across the river. It takes an hour and a half, roughly an hour to do this right. We do it twice, and it's plain whole field. You weigh across, and the device measures velocity, and you report that, and calculates the total flow. Yeah, we don't have the book for this. And then we're also not pictured, we're doing a topographic survey. We're getting a cross section, so we can come back next year and see if the river is eroded and changed its channel. All of it's part of the habitat suitability assessment for aquatic organisms. My group is looking at the water chemistry to assess spring flow. Is the spring flow declining over time, and or is the chemistry changing or anything like that? So we collect lots of different samples for that groundwater study. Dinner looks like that. We eat well. We take a lot of those are Dutch ovens, aluminum Dutch ovens. You can cook a lot of really good stuff in those. And Sean is a pretty good cook too. And then there's this. I'm not going to say much more than that. It's tagged with the Rio Grande Research Center stamp. That's a Gruber one, says. That's right. But that's enough said there. And then we get to go home. That 7 days later, you throw everything back in these trucks and trailers and get out of there. So that's kind of what one of those trips is like. 7 full days. You don't see anybody after you've left until you get to here. Somebody comes to pick you up. And so that's what we look like. I got a before and after right now. At least we still have 12 people. They're the same 12. So anyway, that's what it's like. It's not for everybody, that's for sure. But it sure is rewarding when you have a good trip and your data. Our samples are to be sent off to labs, and it takes a long time to put everything up together after that. You've got a lot of files that were recorded by your instruments. I'll show you a little bit of the data from this trip, but there's a lot of processing that has to be done when you get back. So let me tell you why we're doing some of this. The Rio Grande has a lot of problems. Environmentally, it's got dams up here in Colorado and Mexico, and also in Mexico. The Rio Conchas is a real important player here. Therefore, it's international. We're looking at trees. The river is channelized. We have invasive species, salt cedar and river canyon. We're trying to restore the riparian habitat. And basically what's happening to the river in the Big Bend right here is that the channel's been transformed from a wide, mobile, meandering system with little vegetation, and it's been transformed into a deeper single channel bound on both sides by these high, stable bars. So it goes from being wide open to being what Dave Dean refers to as a ditch. That's what happens over time because of all these things, those two things. So let me show you how you test that. So here's some examples. Hot Springs and Tornado Creek. This is near the hot springs of Big Bend. A lot of you have probably been there. 1936, wide open bar, river's wide open. 2006, all river canyon. The bar is choked with river canyon. It's a weed that got started and it won't go away. Boquillas Canyon entrance, the same thing. 1968, a little bit of vegetation. 2006, a lot. So here's what Big Bend has been doing. In 2005, a really aggressive thing to get rid of the salt cedar involved mechanical, one at a time hatcheting and putting this gauze with herbicide in there to kill them. The beetle that has been experimented with seems to be doing a pretty good job. So now the salt cedar is not the big deal, but the river cane now is. So now they're working with herbicides and burning. So that looks like this. Joe Sirotnik sent me these pictures yesterday, so I can toss them in. This is what they're doing. This is an experimental burning of river cane. That's a forest. This is a river. That's the giant river cane you don't want. So they go in and burn. That's what happens. And spray this aquatic approved herbicide of some kind. Get the name for you if you want it. And it's pretty impressive at times. Some of that stuff really goes up. And then what you see over time is, this is before, May 2008, the forest over Rio. Burned July 2008, that's what it looked like. Then what they do on some of these is they go back in after a year and spray herbicide on the little seed, the little sprouts that come out. But look at this, May of 2009, look at that difference. Burn. Anybody know why that difference is there? Hint is July 2008, May 2009.
The waters that came down from...
Yeah, fall 2008 was a big reset event. 30,000 CFS flushed through here. And notice there's nothing's laid down and there aren't any trees there. That big flood, and by the way, the river is pretty far down there. So these things were just washed in by that 30,000 CFS flood that we had in fall 2008. That did a lot of good for the river. Still notice that the stuff is coming up. And then November of 2011, that's what it looks like. That's the last picture of the sequence. So what they're doing is trying to kill the cane and then see what happens when it is killed. And what I do with my students is go in and we make the topographic maps of this surface to track whether or not the shape of the channel is moving or changing. Because remember, it goes to this narrow ditch, and so what we want in big floods is to come strip that out and move the sand and stuff. So we make models, 3D models before and after to see if the channel morphology is changing. So here's another thing about the hydrology of the state. This is what it was prior to 1950. We built dams. The Bureau of Reclamation started putting dams on Rio Grande after 1950, and in Mexico. Mexico did the same thing. So if you had been a resident of La Junta in the Presidio Ojinaga vicinity, you would have seen a snowmelt peak coming out of New Mexico and Colorado in May to July. That's upstream from Presidio, the confluence. And then you would have seen another big peak that's monsoonal driven that came out of the Rio Conchas. There's about 15 years of data. We started measuring spring flow, the IDWC, in 1932 to 1940. You know, we put the dams in on the Rio Grande, pretty much killed it. I mean, there's not much. Forgotten Reach below Fort Cookman, you probably heard about that. There's not a lot of water in there. Conchas is still contributing a little bit. Then if we go to 1995 to 2005, now the Conchas has been pretty much taken care of too. There is a treaty, I'm not going to go into that, but there are some obligations for Mexico to deliver along that, but it's not what it used to be, clearly. So now we're down to 13%. But it is in this reach that the springs that I'm studying and put water back into that. So it actually goes up a bit, but it is not what it used to be. Dams have an impact, and that's what they do. Climate changing too. This slide is from Dave Dean, Utah State. And basically the photos are probably the most valuable. 1945, open bars, the river channel was free to meander, move, sediment, whatever, not a lot of vegetation. By 2008, it was choked with the windmill and salt cedar. We had that big flood after this, so this is what happened. They stripped that one, they stripped that one, but still left a bunch of that, and that was a big flood. This one, you don't see any of that. So the combination of reduced flow because of dams, lots of sediment being dumped in here by the tributaries like Turtle Creek, and then the vegetation rooting it in place has really degraded the habitat. This bottom graph is just simply the channel width over time. What you don't want is a downward thing like this, but that's what we see. And what you also don't want is vegetation density going up, which is what we see. So basically, there's things working against our poor river. What we're doing, this is data from seepage runs and trips that I've been on. On the left, what we have done is selected a few low flow periods. And the point here is to show the two lines at the bottom are upstream of the springs that are in the lower plains, and the line at the top is downstream. So let's go this way. So what we see clearly is that there's an increase in flow in the channel. This is the one downstream, these are the ones upstream. I don't know if you can read those numbers, about 200 CFS. That translates out to about 200,000 acre-feet per year, which is enough water contributed by the Edwards Trinity Aquifer to take care of a city the size of Bellevue. It's a lot of water that the springs are producing and putting into the river. At the same time, what happens, this is a specific seepage run, this is upstream to downstream. Discharge is measured, this is the amount of water in the river, it goes up. At the same time, what's called specific conductance is a measure of salinity that goes down. Both of those things are good. It improves water quantity and quality, so you see that. And what that's related to is spring flow, base flow coming from the aquifer. That's what I'm studying specifically, is that aquifer flow. There's the aquifer map. This is from Billy Brow's thesis a few years back. It starts putting water into the river down at the hot springs in Big Bend and continues all the way down to Amistad. And it makes that 200,000 acre-feet per year contribution to the river. Comes geologically from the Glen Rose and the Del Carmen. It can be geologically oriented. That's what's Trinity and that's what's Edwards. And a spin-off of that, just a few years back, I was involved with the state thing to make environmental flow recommendations. What do we need in the river to sustain a sound ecological environment? And so my team, all these folks here, we put together this report that said we need a certain amount of water in the river to sustain the environment. In the process, we got to look at the Pecos and the Dells. And those are two beautiful rivers too. I don't know if you've been on those. Some of you would think of the Pecos, you drove over that burned out thing on the way to your Cayenosa on the way to Everland. That's the same river, just not many miles downstream. Our trip usually starts at Pandale, south of I-10, and comes out down near the High Bridge. The water is so clear, you can see if it's a 20-foot deep pool, you can see all the way to the bottom. Thanks to those aquifer spring
You
contributions.
also did research in the Devil's River.
Well, there's the Devils right here. This is Dolan Falls, what's in there. My team is out there right now. In fact, Sean, Taylor, Sam, Jonas, all the ones in those pictures, they're on the Devils right now. In fact, they could be a Dolan today. They're measuring flow in the water. So we're trying to track what those groundwater contributions are to these springs and have a baseline of data to be able to track what they're doing over time. You have to redo these things usually annually. All right, now I want to switch gears. We're going to see something about volcanic areas of interest with the Trans-Pecos. Now I have to switch out here to something. This part, I'm focusing on this Big Bend Ranch State Park. That's what that's about, an national park. And I want to just point out some of the unique or fascinating sort of geologic things about the volcanology. We'll start off with Burro Mesa from Soto Vista, Big Bend National Park. You've probably been there. We're looking west from Soto Vista. You can see Burro Mesa. And what I want you to focus on is that couple of little layers right there. Back that up. We interpret, and by the way, there's a change concept in Big Bend in geology of thought. Prior to about the late 90s, we all thought that there were two volcanoes in Big Bend, and they produced everything. And since then, in the late 90s, actually early 90s, and since then, we've decided that places like Burro Mesa are individual small volcanoes of their own. And I'm going to try to show you why it is we think that. And the first part is a very volcanic fragmental deposit that is that bottom part, followed later in the eruptive cycle by a dry lava. And the modern analog to that is in Southern California. You have these tuff rings, this ring of stuff. Basically, the magma comes up and hits the water table and produces this huge blast that creates a tuff ring, this soft, fragmental material that's just blown out of the hole. Then the other magma comes and flows up and flows out as a solid lava. And that's a lava dome. So a nice little blister-shaped or mushroom-shaped lava dome. So not exactly like that, but that's kind of what Burro Mesa was. We have to realize we've had about 28 million years of erosion to kind of mess these things up and hide some of the detail. So Burro Mesa most likely is funnel-shaped, tough ring with a lava flow. Now there's another one out there. It's at Goat Mountain. This photograph was taken, I think, on my field trip this spring. And what you see again is the same fragmental stuff. It's eroded. It's like that thing from California, except that you've lost a bunch of it to erosion. So the initial fragmental explosives part is this, and then I guess that, and then the lava that comes after it is there. It just eroded. Now I want you to focus on that, and then that black thing, because I have another picture of the same thing. I want you to tell me who and when. And by the way, those same things that I was asking you to focus on, there. Who and when? Famous geologist associated with the Big Bend National Park. Ross Maxwell, 1972. Photo courtesy of Dwight Deal. Big, famous field trip, West Texas Geological Society in 1972. Ross Maxwell was the first superintendent of the national park. He was the main author of the big geologic report that took decades to complete about the resource assessment of the park. And he was a part-time instructor at Sul Ross State University. In addition to being faculty at UT Austin. This was later in his career when he was teaching 1972. Ross Maxwell. Same place. And by the way, it was his group that came up with that idea that everything in Big Bend came from two volcanoes. What they said is that this whole thing is kind of V-shaped. They said it was a river valley. That the volcanoes erupted and all that stuff flowed down this meandering river valley from the High Chizos to the west. And the reason we see it in a few places is that the rest of it got eroded. So the thought changed. The way we think now is that, no, this did not erupt a long ways away. Instead, this was a volcano itself. You see it a little bit of this. So there are individual multiple vents, these two-phase volcanoes that have this initial really explosive thing that produced that puffering, followed by the eruption of the dry lava. Here's another throwback in time. Dr. Powell, this is where I want you to tell me the name of Dwight's truck. Turtle. There we go. This is, anybody know where this is? You do? Okay, what? Yes, and Trace Papalopoulos in this also. 4 Greyhound buses, believe it or not. And notice how clear everything was. I've got some modern pictures. I unfortunately don't have one yet from this perspective. This is also from Buckview. But I do have a few where you can kind of see what things look like now. That's where the solitario is on our big map, by the way. It's that big thing that was in the video, the big blister. See that big blister? It's not that big. There's a bigger one over there. That's our solitario. It's a very famous thing. It's a lacquer or whatever. So this is in there, and it's not unusual to see this happen. I think that picture, that's not much right. But somehow they got Greyhound buses past all that. And
The location, where is that?
it's on the way to Trace Pablo in the solitario.
Greyhound bus.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's it. It's in the middle there. I don't know if you've been there, but that's a long bumpy road.
Yeah, but those were 4-wheel drive buses.
Oh, yeah.
Got a lot of people to push.
Yeah, a lot of people. Well, anyway, let's look at some modern photos. Unfortunately, they're not from the same perspective. Here's one. And so there's that tree. There's that tin thing. So the tree looked a lot better in 72. It's still there. And the telephone pole is still there. This is from the backside of this windmill. See the pump? The pump is still there. This is just 2 summers ago. Once in a while, I put a solar panel, and the pump doesn't work. They put a submersible in there. And they pump water. So there's actually water there. The quality is terrible. But if you have field camp out there like I did, at least you have water for showers. Solar shower, we'd set up a little shower space right there. You could heat up the water, and you didn't need to, it's hot. We kind of have showers set up there. So that's that, and the vegetation has really grown. This was very clear back in 72, and it's going to come around. This is what our field camp in the San Jacinto looks like, a forest of shade. So that's what we did. Anyway, so by 1972, you might have been on the trail. Yeah, you might.
Actually, one.
Okay, so that's what I look at. The river, the volcanoes. What do we have here to help with you? What I call our river cache. In 1993, Whitford Stark and I got a grant from NSF. It's called Instrumentation and Laboratory Improvement. I said we need improved access to our natural laboratories. So we got rafts and a trailer and a lot of stuff. Later, he helped us to purchase 5 canoes. We had that in our cache. And then Corey Maples, welder up here, man, he's good. He rigged up that trailer and some other stuff for us. canoes. And then Rio Grande has contributed a lot of camping gear. So that's kind of our setup. These are some Park Service boats, obviously there, but these are ours, and that's our trailer. We can haul a lot of stuff, and a lot of boats to the river. And that's Boquillas. That's a put-in to Boquillas Canyon. The put-ins are pretty chaotic. You can imagine trying to get all the gear on the boats and whatever, and all your science gear. So that's kind of what that looks like. Now, our GIS lab in late 90s, I think it was 98, NSF again came through for us. Course curriculum and laboratory improvement was the same program. It changed its name. So we got a grant to purchase the GIS lab. So the first version was in 98. If you know GIS, we started at R23, the good old days, and now we're at 10.1. 10.2 is already out there. We use the lab to prepare maps and to process data. There's data, an example. This is from our trip. So one of the things we did is we floated the lower canyons. Remember this place just a few weeks ago, is we measured water quality as we went down the river. And we synchronized that data with the GPS. So you can see the impact on the water quality of all the springs. So the symbols are milligrams per liter, basically salinities. Higher TDS, total dissolved solids up here. And gradually they get smaller and smaller and smaller. So there's one way to process and prepare data to show people what you saw, what you observed. The smaller the symbol size, the more the river, which is a good thing, due to the input from the springs. Rusty Woodburn is just finishing his thesis, we hope, and here's his map of the tables. This one, instead of water quality, is water flow. The thickness of the line is proportional to the amount of water in the lower Pecos River channel. So this is Pandale down to the Rio Grande. So the line is thicker, the river is increasing in flow because of the spring effect. So that worked. This one's my favorite. Seth's map. I love good maps with lots of this stuff around them. This is a geologic map of the Lost Mines Trail area. Huge detail. Otherwise, we don't have maps of geology, anything close. If you type Lost Mines Trail, you go from there to there. And this is the detail of somebody who spends a lot of time out there working at cross sections and all the different rock things. These are dikes, magmas that cut through the strata, and volcanic stuff, and cross sections, and stratigraphic descriptions. That's a good map. Seth, good job. He's right there. That's what he's at. Look at that. That is that. And there's a lot of detail there. So we know a lot more about Lost Mines Trail. The system, Texas State University system, owns Christmas Mountains. We did not produce this map. Chris Henry did in the 90s, but we digitized it. Blake Houston did this, and he did a great job. This is just a printed version. We have a digital version of that geologic map. That's the Christmas Mountains. And then Lauren Reuter did some computer graphics with this. This is the Christmas Mountains. And she got some help from San Antonio College. Kind of made what the magma chamber looked like in the dikes and stuff. She also made these kind of 3D flash, Adobe Flash things, so you can rotate it around and see the volcano erupting in 3D. My computer can't handle that, but she did that too. It's very cool stuff. The analytical lab, last. We used to have one, and then Leslie Hopper's Adelante Chaos program is resurrecting it. We have an SEM, and an XRF is in storage. Just got delivered about 2 days ago. The SEM does things like this. I'm not even going to tell you what it means, just ooh and ah at the beginning. It's chemistry of a tiny, maps of the chemistry of a tiny area of a rock. I'll just tell you that that's 100 micrometers. That's about the thickness of a sheet of paper. It's tiny, but there's so much detail that you can see with that. This is also from Seth. The XRF produces data that you can use to predict evolution of magmas. Magmas change composition over time. This is one of Seth's models. It has data that our XRF will produce, even though this is not from ours, because ours is still in the box. Okay, so that's the end. Big Bend is obviously a great destination. Something bad could happen on a field trip, but you're likely to not have that many bad things happen if you're prepared. And you're not, well, and you're smart. We as field trip leaders need to be prepared. Border-related violence, I just don't think it's a big deal. Other things out there are, and we need to be prepared. That's it. Thank you.